Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my thoughts on a list by Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone made a list on their website of 50 terrible films by great directors. And so I was actually requested to share my thoughts on this list by Brian. And so here we are, and I want to give a shout out to Brian again for requesting this topic for this video. And if there's another topic, film, TV show, or anime, or other thing that you would like me to discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, with this list, I decided to actually revise it. So, I looked into the filmography of these directors, and for the directors that I wasn't that familiar with when it comes to their films, I just left the original choice by the writer in there. But for the ones that I disagreed with, I put in a different film. So I'm going to start with the first director that was mentioned on the site and on the article, so to speak. The first director is Penny Marshall. And for the list, the author, who is the senior author on RollingStone.com, his name is Andy Green, he picked Renaissance Man with Danny DeVito. And it is one of Penny Marshall's weaker films, but I personally don't find it to be terrible. I think it's actually kind of a enjoyable, fun little watch just for Danny DeVito and his performance. Danny DeVito's performance in that film alone makes it so it's not terrible to me. So for me, I picked The Preacher's Wife. I know Whitney Houston is in it. I know Denzel Washington is in it, but that is such a generic, forgettable, and just boring film to me. Like, at least Renaissance Man, I've got Danny DeVito, and there's a certain entertainment value that you get just from Danny DeVito and the energy that he brings to the film, and so on and so forth. While Renaissance Man does have kind of a sitcom style plot, and there are other predictable elements to it, it's not nearly as treacly, not nearly as sweet, not nearly as just lifetime original movie of the week as The Preacher's Wife. So that's why I personally decided to not pick Renaissance Man. I think The Preacher's Wife is worse. And I believe The Preacher's Wife got worse reviews too when it came out compared to Renaissance Man. The next director that is on this list is Darren Aronofsky. And on the Rolling Stone article, the author picked The Fountain. I can see why people aren't into The Fountain, but I kind of have a soft spot for it because I actually did see the composer, the people who actually worked on the score for the film. I saw them perform the music live, and I went in and decided to go see the film pretty much after that. Like, pretty soon after that, not pretty much. Pretty soon after that, like, I checked it out from the library, and I didn't mind it. It was interesting, and I thought it had some really impressive and incredible visuals. So that alone makes it a better film to me than Noah. Like, I think that's Aronofsky's worst, because it's just a film that he was just a poor fit for. It's like way too long and overblown, and I just couldn't get into the movie. And yeah, there's a budget behind it, but it just, to me, that is Aronofsky's worst to date, is Noah. It's not The Fountain, because The Fountain at least is unique and interesting, and it doesn't quite always work, but it's got some really incredible visuals, and honestly, one of Jackman's best acting performances of his career. Noah, you got Russell Crowe just kind of sleepwalking through the movie for a paycheck. And it's just a overblown, waterlogged, familiar tale of Noah and his ark. The next director that the list mentions is James L. Brooks. And how do you know? I can see that's definitely a worthy pick, but I went with I'll Do Anything, because I'll Do Anything is a mess of a movie. Like, how do you know it's generic and forgettable and not really anywhere near as compelling as some of the other films that the director has done in the past? But I'll Do Anything was a mess from the beginning, and then it became an even bigger mess after it was finished shooting, because it was initially envisioned as a musical, which was a dumb idea, and it wasn't really something that meshed that well with the plot of the film. It just felt out of place, and the test screening was disastrous. It was an absolute nightmare. And as a result, the film was reshot and completely changed fundamentally, so it was no longer a musical. And the version that was released theatrically and is available to see today, you can just tell that it's not what the director had intended, and it's just a really awkward film to watch as a result. It's got a good cast. I mean, Nick Nolte and a bunch of other people. Um, the original musical concept actually had songs by Prince, but it's just one of those films that was misguided from the beginning, and then the version that we do get is just an attempt to try to fix what was a clear mistake and a clear misstep. And so that's why I feel that is worse than How Do You Know? The next director on the list is Jonathan Demme, and the author picked The Truth About Charlie, and I get that. It's not a great remake, and it's not a great film by any means, but I don't think it's Jonathan Demme's worst. Like, his direction is still pretty solid in that film. That film's problems really have to do with the writing and in some ways kind of the casting, because I didn't really buy Wahlberg in the role of the lead. But to me, like, one of the earlier films he did in his career called Handle with Care, that is way worse. It was a movie that was just made because of the popularity of CB radios. That's the only reason why that film was even made in the first place. And that film is really hard to sit through because there's barely any amount of an actual plot, and the performances are pretty flat. The direction isn't really the best. The plot really isn't that engaging. Like I said, there's barely much of anything because it was only made because CB radios are a thing right now. So let's make a CB radio movie. And that's why Handle with Care exists. And yeah, to me, that's a lot worse than The Truth About Charlie. The next filmmaker that is on the list is Amy Heckerling, who you might recognize. Like, she did Fast Times at Ridgemont High and a lot of other things. And I think she did Fast Times. I think I might be wrong though. That might be a different director. No, I think it was Amy Heckerling. No, she did. Yeah, she did Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Clueless, and she directed the original Look Who's Talking. And so on the list, the writer chooses Look Who's Talking too, the sequel, the Look Who's Talking, and the writer even says it's not technically a bad movie, but okay, you say it's not technically a bad movie, but then why did you have it on the list and say that it's a terrible film? Terrible film by a great director. And here's the thing, I'm not even the biggest fan of Look Who's Talking To. I think it's just not that great. But I don't think it's a terrible film, but I definitely don't think it's a great movie or a great sequel. But if you look at Heckerling's career, like she did worse than that. I mean, her last film that she directed in Vamps is so much worse. It's not even remotely close. That's like one of the worst vampire comedies I've ever seen. It sucks the life out of you. It's really shitty. It's a really bad film. And that was the last film that she directed. So to me, that should have been the pick. Like that is her worst in my opinion is Vamps. It doesn't even look like it's directed by the same woman who did Clueless and Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It looks like it's just directed by any other average filmmaker who was given a bit of a budget for some kind of cheap indie film that went direct to video. The next director on the list is Chris Columbus, and on the Rolling Stone article, the author picked a film that I was kind of like, really? You went with Bicentennial Man? So yeah, he went with Bicentennial Man, and I'm like, Bicentennial Man is a film that I'm conflicted on. It is a movie that's not one of my favorites. I do think that it's too long. I do feel that it's flawed. But even with its flaws, I think there's a certain heart to it. And there's certain elements to it that are honestly fairly excellent, like the special effects, the visuals. I don't think Chris Columbus's direction is a problem. And Robin Williams still brings a lot of life and vitality to the film. And it's one of his better performances. Now, on the flip side, Chris Columbus, many, many years later, did a film called Pixels with Adam Sandler. And Adam Sandler's friends, his crew of funny friends that he is cast in a majority of his films, at least as of late. And to me, that is infinitely worse than Bicentennial Man. Because Bicentennial Man, you can still see that Chris Columbus, he's still trying. And Pixels, he's not trying anymore. Like, he's as animated and as up for the job as Adam Sandler was in that movie. And to me, it's also just his worst film. Like, that is a movie that I absolutely do not like, honestly, at all. Except for maybe, like, to be fair, there's like one or two scenes that are decent, and I like the remix of a Queen song that's used for the soundtrack. But other than that, I really don't like that film. It's a prime example of taking a good idea and just taking an absolute shit all over it. And Chris Columbus's lifeless, bland direction really doesn't do it any favors either. So, yeah, to me, Pixels, that should have been the pick. Definitely over Bicentennial Man. The next director is John McTiernan, and the pick that the Rolling Stone writer comes up with here is baffling. He picks Basic, which I think is actually a pretty solid thriller by McTiernan, which stars John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson. I actually think it's the last good film that McTiernan did, and he picks that one, and I'm like, really? You picked Basic over the Rollerball remake? Like, the Rollerball remake is easily, without a doubt, McTiernan's worst movie. Like, it's not even close. Like, how in the hell does Basic wind up being your pick for the I I'm speechless. Like, I'm stumbling on my words because I can't believe that somebody would have this thought process, especially someone who's a senior writer for a major publication. Like, did the guy not see the Rollerball remake? Is that why he had never seen the film? So that's why he chose basic? If that's the case, like, why are you doing a list like this and you're not doing your research? Like, if I was given this task, I would watch as many of the films by these directors as I possibly could and figure out and determine what films I'm going to pick based on that. I'm not just going to go off the top of my head based on what I saw. It's like, that's not really a fair list if you're doing something like this, especially for a publication. If you're doing it for free, if you're just doing a YouTube video or whatever, that's one thing. But if you're getting paid to do this, like, you should put a little more effort into it. Because, I mean, basic? Give me a fucking break. Rollerball is the pick, and it should have been the pick. Because Rollerball is just ridiculous. It's so awful. It's embarrassing. It's an embarrassing low point in John McTiernan's career. Basic is not a low point in his career by any means. The next director on the list is Richard Donner. And the writer picks Assassins for some reason. And I'm like, Assassins isn't that bad. Like, I'm not a super huge fan of the film. I do think it's a bit overlong. I do think the subplot with Julianne Moore isn't as entertaining or as enjoyable as the stuff with Stallone and Banderas. But I don't think that's a bad film. I don't think it's Donner's worst. Donner did way worse films early in his career. For instance, he did a film in 1970 called Lola. And this is a movie about a 40-year-old man who gets involved romantically with an underage girl. So basically what it is it's a low-budget knockoff of Lolita. To me, that is so much worse. it's, it's no contest to me. Like, that is... Assassins? No, it's Lola. I mean, just for the context and the the subject matter alone of that movie, like, that is easily his worst film. Not Assassins. The next director is Spike Lee, and for the list, the author picked Girl 6. I get it. Girl 6 didn't do well. It wasn't a film that got a lot of acclaim as well from critics at the time. But I never hated that movie. I thought it was kind of interesting, and it was fun to see Spike Lee direct a film that he didn't write. And to me, he's done worse. And one of them is She Hate Me. Like, She Hate Me, first off, that title is stupid. And that is easily one of his most bland, boring, dull, unfunny, lame films that he's ever done. And it reflected in the box office, and it reflected with the critical reception. Like, it's one of his lowest rated films in his filmography for a reason. So I would have put She Hate Me there. I think there's also an argument for Chirac, because that's pretty bad too, but I'll go with She Hate Me. Now, the next director is Steven Soderbergh. I've never been as enamored with him as everyone else has been, or not everyone else, but as other people have been. So the pick that the offer chose, The Good German, all right, I'll just take his word for it. I don't think Kimmy is bad enough to put it on like his worst of his career list. I think Contagion is beyond overrated, but I don't think it's probably not worse than The Good German. I haven't seen The Good German, so I can't really say for sure, but I know Soderbergh also did a film called Full Frontal that did really bad in terms of box office numbers and with its critical reception when it came out, and it's still one of his lowest rated movies, so that probably could have been a pick as well. But I'm just going to trust the judgment of the writer here. Now, the next director, though, is Sidney Pollack, and he chose Random Hearts. And you know what? I think that's a good pick because Random Hearts is a film that I think I saw once years ago, and I don't really remember much about it at all. It is one of his lowest rated films in his filmography, and yeah, so I'll agree with that one. And then the next director or directors is the Wachowskis, and this is an obvious pick: Jupiter Ascending. Like if the Wachowskis together directed The Matrix Resurrections, then that would have been my pick, but only one of them did. So it's not a Wachowskis film. It's a Wachowski film. Uh Jupiter Ascending is a fucking train wreck. So, yeah, that is definitely a movie that I agree with being considered to be like the worst from those two. Is even something like Speed Racer, at least it has a really fun visual style. And it's not that bad of a film. I think Speed Racer, it got a bad rap when it came out, but it's a movie that's deserving of its cult following, if you ask me. But Jupiter Ascending is just a disaster. Like it's well shot. It's got some great looking visuals at times by the Wachowskis, but it's just a bad movie. And so I definitely agree with it being the pick for the Wachowskis' worst. The next director is Alexander Payne. I haven't seen enough of his films to really say anything. I think I saw Election years ago, and that's about it. So I'll agree with the writer in their pick, which is Downsizing. The next director is Sidney Lumet, and the writer picks Garbo Talks. And Garbo Talks, I don't remember being a super big fan of, but I thought the concept of it was kind of interesting. And while, yeah, it wasn't necessarily a film that really lived up to the premise, and the ending was kind of disappointing, it's by no means worse than Family Business. Family Business is one of his most lowest rated films in his filmography, and it is a massive waste of an excellent cast. I mean, Dustin Hoffman, Sean Connery, I believe Matthew Broderick who's in that as well? Like it's a terrible film. It's really bad. Like it's not only really boring, it's also got very questionable writing in terms of the characters. Yeah, Matthew Broderick was in it. Yeah, Sean Connery, Dustin Hoffman, and Matthew Broderick. And it's got a really off tone. It's just bad. I did a review of it on my channel, and I feel it's just an incredibly disappointing film. And I wasn't the only one. It did bad in the box office, and it did poorly with critics. And so, yeah, I think that's a lot worse than Garbo Talks. Because Garbo Talks at least had an interesting idea, and it kept you invested in the film throughout most of it. It wasn't until the end when things got a little dicey. But yeah, Carrie Fisher and Ron Silver, and it honestly features two of their best performances. Can't say anything like that about the performances in Family Business. Like, it's some of the worst of all three performers when it comes to their careers. And yeah, Family Business, it's the kind of thing that just gives you the business, but like in the wrong way. The next director is John Carpenter, and to be honest, I think The Ward is a good pick, but for me personally, I think Dark Star is worse than The Ward. Like The Ward, yeah, The Ward is a very generic, very run-of-the-mill horror film. It definitely seemed like Carpenter was going through the motions on that one, but it's still a film that is at worst average to me. Like I can kind of watch that movie. It's got some decent performances by the cast as well. Dark Star, I don't like at all. Like I really don't like. I don't like Dark Star. I did a review of it already. I wasn't a fan of it. I don't get the cult following. I don't think it's funny. I don't think it's that interesting. I know it's a student film, essentially. It's still bad. So if we're talking about John Carpenter, and I know some people would be like Memoirs of an Invisible Man, I actually don't mind that movie. I I'm like one of the few people out there that kind of likes that film. But it is a very flawed movie, and I could understand people picking that as his worst. But to me, Dark Star is his worst because it's the one film that he's done that I just do not have a desire to ever watch again. Like The Ward, it's disappointing at times, but honestly, I'm curious about watching that again just to see, you know, what his last film was like visually. Dark Star, he's just starting out, and it's really more of Dan O'Bannon's film in a lot of ways because I think Dan O'Bannon also shot some scenes. So it's just, but to me, I think that's his worst is Dark Star. Like I get it. I know it has a cult following. I'm not in that boat. I would much rather watch The Ward or Memoirs of an Invisible Man over Dark Star. The next director is Frank Oz, and the pick is the Stepford Wives remake. And yeah, I mean, that's definitely an obvious and very fitting choice. That was just a that was a insanely bad movie, especially for Frank Oz. Like he was just the wrong director, and it was just a film that is infamous for the budget going over during production and just all these other problems with it, and it shows on the screen. It is a mess of the highest order. Number so the 17th director that's mentioned is Ang Lee, and the writer for Rolling Stone, he picked Gemini Man, and I get that Gemini Man is not a great film, but I didn't hate it. I thought it was okay. Um, and I think his direction in it is pretty good, and it's one of the best looking 4Ks that I have in my collection. When it comes to just the visuals alone, like it's just a really stunning 4K transfer. Really great looking film. So that's why I wouldn't put it as his worst. I think Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk is worse than Gemini Man. Because Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, it was just a tech demo. It's barely a movie, and it's an obnoxious tech demo. It's a kind of tech demo film that doesn't hold up at all because it was shot with a really high frame rate. Because Ang Lee was obsessed with tech at the time. He wanted to, take a page from Peter Jackson and do something like that. So that's why he did this movie. And it's based on a book that I've never read, but the plot and everything about it is just so been there, done that. At least Gemini Man is something that's a little bit different, a little bit unique. Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk is just the same kind of generic drama about, a guy in the military that you've seen a million times before. But this time it's got really obnoxious high frame rate photography that's hard to look at. So, yeah, I would say that is his worst, hands down. The next director is Billy Wilder, another director I'm not super familiar with. So the pick was Buddy Buddy, his last film. I'm not going to argue that. Next director is Milos Forman, and the pick was Goya's Ghosts. I haven't seen a large majority of his filmography, so I think that choice is just fine. The next director on the list is Barry Levinson, and the pick was Sphere. And I don't understand that. Yes, apparently it's not as good as the novel. Boo-hoo. It is what it is. Movies are a different medium than the novel, so you can't look at a novel and say that the movie sucks just because it's not exactly like the novel. I'm so tired of that argument. And I think Sphere is actually a pretty good film. It's got some great visual effects. It's got a really good cast. I think it has a really interesting concept. Does it fully live up to the most potential of the idea? No. Is the book maybe better in that capacity? Yes, but the film is still a good visual spectacle, and I think as a film, it's pretty decent. Like, if you've never read the book, like, it's actually a pretty decent film for what it is. It's a lot better than Envy, the film with Ben Stiller and Jack Black, where the whole plot is around Jack Black inventing something that removes dog crap from people's lawns. I'm like, how is Sphere worse than Envy? Envy is one of the worst comedies that I have ever seen. I didn't laugh once watching the entire thing, and that includes Christopher Walken's weirdo performance that he did in the movie. That film sucks. Sphere, I will watch twice, despite how long that is, over Envy. Again, that's how much I hated that film. So yeah, Envy to me is way worse than Sphere. Number 21 on the list, the 21st director is Elia Kazan. The pick was The Last Tycoon, another director I'm not familiar with when it comes to their filmography. So I'm like, okay, that's fine, I guess. Then you have Sam Raimi, and the writer picked Oz the Great and Powerful, and I can see that, but in all honesty, I don't think his direction was that bad in that film. And I haven't seen the film in a while, but I remember not minding it for what it was the last time I saw it. So I would pick For the Love of the Game, because at least Sam Raimi, you felt like he was enjoying himself directing Oz. Like, he had a lot of spirit when it comes to his direction in that. And yeah, it was a departure when it comes to the typical kind of films that he normally did, but it was because of that fact that he was really into it. And it really was something that he was able to showcase his ability to really wow people with his sense of visual style again, and mess around with unique camera techniques and movement. For the Love of the Game is a film that, if you did not know that Sam Raimi directed it, you wouldn't believe that he directed the movie. It is just a very forgettable, one note, been there, done that, in one ear, out the other baseball drama. And so for me, yeah, I think that's his worst film. And to be fair, I don't think that film was entirely terrible, but I do think it's kind of a bad movie. Because I've never been into it. I've always felt like it's just too long. I never got into the romance angle. Kevin Costner, it just felt like he was just taking this for a paycheck, not really one of his most inspiring or passionate performances. And then you got Sam Raimi behind the camera, and it's like, what are you doing here? Like, this is not your wheelhouse. And he showed that he could step outside his comfort zone with The Gift, but The Gift is good. And there's other films that he did around the same time that I felt that Sam did a good job with, that weren't necessarily over the top horror comedies. But For the Love of the Game, like, that is just a film that to me is just so much worse than Oz the Great and Powerful. So that's why I personally picked that over Oz. The next director is Robert Altman, and the writer picked Beyond Therapy. And Beyond Therapy is not one of my favorites of Altman's career, but I don't mind the film. I like Jeff Goldblum in it. I like some of the other cast members. I can get some laughs out of it. It's so much better than Quintet. Quintet was an infamous bomb when it came out. Like, critics were just absolutely savage when it comes to that movie. And they were completely right. That film is just something else in terms of just how bad it is. And yeah, it was a just incredible flop in every possible capacity. And to me, like, I don't know how you could pick any other film when it comes to Altman's career when it comes to his worst. Because it is unquestionably quintet. The next director is Frank Capra. Not as familiar with his filmography as other people are, so I'll just go with the writer's choice here, A Pocketful of Miracles. The next director after that is Barry Sonnenfeld, and the pick was Wild Wild West. And on one hand, I can get it. It's not a good film, but I can enjoy it as a guilty pleasure, and it's got some good direction by Sonnenfeld. I don't think his direction is bad by any means in that movie. So for me personally, my pick is RV. Like, that is worse than Wild Wild West. I will watch Wild Wild West over RV. RV is just a painfully lame road trip comedy with Robin Williams, and it's honestly one of my least favorite films that Robin Williams did. Robin's trying his best. He's trying to make things work with this movie, but it's just not gonna happen. And there's a whole scene with a porta potty, or is it a porta potty, or is it some, the toilet in the RV, and it explodes and it poops everywhere. You're like, ha ha ha! I'm like, that is so much worse than Wild Wild West. Does Wild Wild West have a whole scene that's basically one giant shit joke? No. So yeah, Wild Wild West is a lot better than that. The next director is John Huston, and the writer's pick was Phobia. I can understand that. Phobia is not really a film that everyone's gonna like, but I kind of don't mind that movie. So instead, I picked The Macintosh Man, because The Macintosh Man was like one of Huston's like first major flops, and like critics derided the film when it came out. And yeah, that is a movie that did really poorly, and I would much rather watch Phobia than The Macintosh Man. The next director is John Ford, another director I haven't watched as many films when it comes to his filmography, so the pick was Wings of Eagles. All right, I'll go with that. Hitchcock is on the list, but he's not next. The next director is Clint Eastwood. And Clint Eastwood, the writer on Rolling Stone, he picked the 1517 to Paris. I haven't seen that film yet, but from what I've seen when it comes to the trailer alone, that is not at all worse than something like Breezy. Like, Breezy is honestly my pick for Eastwood's worst movie. It didn't even hit home video until 1998. So that just shows you how beloved this movie was. And yeah, it did poorly, did really bad in the box office. Critics weren't that enamored with it when it came out. It's a movie that is like the anti-Eastwood film. It's about this girl who's a hippie who's just floating through life, and always looking at things on the bright side, breezing through her daily life. And it's a kind of film that, to me, has aged really badly, and not in terms of it being controversial or anything. It's just aged poorly in terms of the characterization, and the direction is nothing impressive. So yeah, I think that one is an easy pick for me when it comes to Eastwood's worst, is Breezy. I mean, it's the type of film that you do not expect Eastwood to be directing, and it shows. Like, he is so out of his field here. Like, this is not the kind of film that he should be directing at all, and it really shows if you've ever seen that film. Now, the next director on the list is Victor Fleming. The pick by the Rolling Stone writer was Joan of Arc, another director I'm not that familiar with, so I'm like, okay. And the next director is Alfred Hitchcock, and the writer picked Juno and the Paycock. I've only seen Hitchcock's more well-known suspense thrillers, so I guess out of those, maybe Family Plot would be the one that I could consider to be his weakest film. But even then, like, I don't hate Family Plot, and I don't think Family Plot is a bad movie. So I'm just gonna go with the writer here. I'm gonna go with the writer again with Mike Nichols, because the writer picked "What Planet Are You From," which Mike Nichols directed, and that is definitely his worst movie. I mean, that film is really, really, really bad, and just embarrassing for everyone involved, especially the lead actor. I mean, I don't understand why the hell this actor chose to be in this movie. Like, why did Gary Shandling choose to be in this film? Played some space alien, and it was just a serious low point for both men's careers. The next director is Robert Zemeckis, and this pick kind of pissed me off, I gotta be honest. I'm like, how the hell do you pick Death Becomes Her as not only a bad film, but as the worst film of Zemeckis' career? You gotta be fucking kidding me. Like, Death Becomes Her, to me personally, is one of his best films. In essence, it is a Tales from the Crypt movie through and through, which is fitting because Zemeckis was a producer on the HBO show and is a huge fan of EC Comics. And I mean, to me, it's a classic. I mean, you've got Goldie Hawn, Meryl Streep, Bruce Willis. The three of them are just terrific in the film. And the movie has some just astonishing, just amazing direction by Zemeckis. You could argue it's his most visually impressive film that he's done when it comes to his career. And it's still really funny to this day. And the effects, I think, still hold up really well. And the guy's talking about how the effects are, unconvincing and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? This movie won an Oscar for visual effects. And I still think they hold up really well. Like the effect of Goldie Hawn when she has a hole in her stomach. Like, that still looks really good to this day. So I don't understand that pick at all. I love Death Becomes Her. It's one of my favorite films. Really enjoy that movie. And Bruce Willis is just so funny in that. Where's my wife? She's in the morgue, sir. The morgue? She'll be furious. That just kills me every time. I love Death Becomes Her. Like, what? Beowulf, like, come on now. Beowulf is a film that not only is aged like milk because it uses CGI that does not hold up at all nowadays. It's just a really bad retelling of a classic myth. And it's also a film that featured one of the worst theatrical experiences of my life. When I saw that film in 3D, it was so bad because the 3D messed up multiple times during the movie where the screen like split up into two parts. Like it was like the film was split into two. And there was like two blurry messes of scenes. And the glasses were uncomfortable and hurt to wear. And it was just a painful experience. And the film sucked too, so that didn't really help. So yeah, Beowulf to me, that's easily his worst. It's not Death Becomes Her. The next director is Ridley Scott, and the writer picked A Good Year. Yeah, it's not one of his best films, and he did it was like a rom-com. Definitely something that's out of his comfort zone. But to me, 1492 Conquest of Paradise is a lot worse than that is. Like, that film is just a tedious, tiresome film. And it also glorifies Christopher Columbus, who is just an abhorrent, awful person. So that doesn't do it any favors. I think that is his worst. And at the time, a lot of critics felt that it was his worst. And still a lot of critics feel that that's his worst film. And I'm not going to argue with them. So I think that I'd rather watch A Good Year. At least I get, Russell Crowe. It's a fun little performance by him in that movie. I don't have anything good to say about 1492 Conquest of Paradise, except the production values and the art direction. That's about it. The next director is David Fincher, and you know what? I'll give this writer a lot of credit. Credit. For some reason, I flood my words again. I apologize. It seems like I need a little more caffeine. I need another boost. I know I'm doing the Dew this time, not Mellow Yellow, but that's only because there's no Mellow Yellow where I'm at right now. They're out. And I hope it's not permanent, because that would really suck. But speaking of things that suck, the film that the writer picked for the worst movie of David Fincher's career was Alien 3. And I'm not good. It definitely is his worst film. And Fincher will agree. Like, Fincher, he even agrees that that's the worst movie that he's done. And I'm not going to talk about Alien 3 that much, because I'd be here all day talking about why I don't like that movie. So I'm just going to say, I'm not going to change that. It's a good pick. Now, the next director is William Friedkin, and the writer picked Jade. And I was like, Jade? You're going to pick Jade with David Caruso? Like, that's not that bad. That's actually a pretty decent film. I think that's one of Friedkin's more underrated movies. Like, if you ask me, a much worse film that he did was Deal with the Century. Like, Deal with the Century, the cast is great. Chevy Chase, Sigourney Weaver, Gregory Hines. The film, on the other hand, not good. It's just a really bad fit for Friedkin. It was a comedy and a satire, and he didn't know really how to get it off the ground properly. It's a very awkward, weird film to sit through. And yeah, for me, and my money, like, that is definitely his worst movie. And critics felt the same way. Like, that is one of his, I think that is his lowest rated film, is Deal with the Century. The next director is Harold Ramis. I know my friend Matt's not going to like this. The writer picked Club Paradise as his worst movie. And I don't like this either, because I don't think that is Harold's worst. I don't think it's his best, but I definitely don't think it's his worst film. I mean, Harold Ramis, he directed films that are way worse than Club Paradise. I mean, Year One, that could have been a contender for worst. I could agree with that. But I'm going to pick Stuart Saves His Family, because Year One is bad, but Stuart Saves His Family is like the rare level of just garbage. And it you could tell that Harold didn't have his heart in it at all. So I think Stuart Saves His Family is a much worse film overall. And like that character on SNL of Stuart Smalley, like, he was fine in small doses, but in a feature film, it was just insufferable. That honestly might be a film that could be a contender for being the worst SNL movie, even over It's Pat. So that's why, yeah, I'll pick Stuart Saves His Family. And also, by the time that Harold Ramis, by the time that, so it was Rick Moranis there for a second. But by the time Harold Ramis did Stuart Saves His Family, he was still in his prime as a director. Like, he just recently did stuff like Groundhog Day. So there wasn't much of an excuse for that one. So yeah, that is definitely his worst for me. That or Year One. But I'm going to give Stuart Saves His Family a slight edge over it, because he was still in his prime at that point. The next director was Ivan Reitman, and the pick was Junior. And I don't like Junior. I'm not a big fan of Junior, but I don't think that's worse than No Strings Attached. So that's why I picked No Strings Attached. Because No Strings Attached is just a really bland, blasé rom-com. Like, Junior, say whatever you want about it. Like, it's not something that you're going to necessarily forget. Like, it's a film that sticks with you, for better or worse. And Reitman's direction was never the problem with that film. And the movie itself, like I said, I'm not a big fan of it. But there is a certain charm to it, and Arnold and DeVito are still really good together. And as a result, like, I can watch that movie and I would rather watch that film, despite that I'm not super big on it, over a lot of other so-called bad movies. Like, I'd rather watch Junior like twice over Theodore Rex, for instance. you know. Um, the next director is Martin Scorsese, and the writer's pick was Boxcar Bertha, and I get that thought process, but Boxcar Bertha is not a great film, but I'd rather watch that over Kundun. Like, Kundun, or however you say it, like, that was just a vanity project of the highest order for the Dalai Lama, and visually it's well directed, but that film is such a chore to sit through. So yeah, I will pick Kundun over Boxcar Bertha. The next director is John Landis, and the pick was The Stupids. And The Stupids is a bad film, and John Landis' direction isn't great in it, but John Landis directed a film called Dying to Get Rich, aka Susan's Plan. And The Stupids, as bad as it is, and as dumb as it is, I would rather watch that on a loop over Dying to Get Rich again. Dying to Get Rich has a scene where the entire cast is locked in a closet together, and one of them farts. So that's Dying to Get Rich. People dying of farts in a closet. So for me, that is easily the lowest point, the lowest rung, the lowest nadir of John Landis' career. It's a film that didn't even get a theatrical release. Like, easily his worst movie. It's hands down his worst film. Even over something like Blues Brothers 2000, because that's not a good movie either, but his direction wasn't that bad. Had a good soundtrack. I like John Goodman. I like Dan Aykroyd. Dying to Get Rich, there's nothing that I even remotely liked about that movie. Like, I hated that film. So yeah, Dying to Get Rich. That's my pick. Clearly the author who wrote this had never seen that film, because if he had, he would have just been an instant, oh yeah, that's his worst. The next director or directors is the Coen brothers. The pick was The Lady Killers. No, I think that's a no contest pick. I definitely agree with that. I don't know what they were thinking with that one. With Tom Hanks sounding like Foghorn Leghorn, I remember like watching a half of that movie and just shutting it off because I couldn't stand it anymore. So yeah, that's a good pick. The next director is Ron Howard, and the writer picks The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, and I'm like, really? The Grinch Who Stole Christmas is Ron Howard's worst movie? Not even close. I mean, how? To me, I think it's Hillbilly Elegy, because that looked like something that was directed by any other average guy that Netflix would just pick up out of a lineup of directors. It could be also Solo, because that was a very lifelessly directed movie. It was a film that you could tell Ron had no passion for whatsoever, and was just a last minute replacement choice, because Disney decided to fire the original directors that were working on Solo because they didn't like the direction they were taking things in. So they brought in a yes man and Ron Howard. So yeah, Grinch Who Stole Christmas, like, that has some of his most visually impressive directing. So no, and it's not a bad film anyway, so I don't understand that pick. Hillbilly Elegy, though, that's a pretty bad movie. The next director is another one I don't understand the pick here. It's John Hughes, and the pick is She's Having a Baby. And She's Having a Baby, I don't love, but I didn't mind the film for what it was. That is so much better than Curly Sue. Like, Curly Sue, it's the last film that he directed, and it's also his lowest rated movie. So I don't understand how you go with She's Having a Baby over Curly Sue. It has to be one of those things where the guy who did this list, he didn't see Curly Sue. So that's why Curly Sue wasn't on there. Curly Sue, it played out like an advertisement. for a soda drink company. And I think the actress who played Curly Sue was in an ad for Coke or Pepsi. I think it was Pepsi. And so that's really what that film played out like. And it was just as superficial as an advertisement too. So yeah, for me, Curly Sue, that's the pick. I don't understand why you would pick She's Having a Baby. The next director is David O. Russell. I personally think Accidental Love is worse than Amsterdam. But I know technically he took his name off the movie because it was an unfinished film that didn't completely finish production because the company that was making it ran into financial trouble. But then it was finished later without the confirmation and validation of the director, and they put his name on it, and then he requested to take his name off of it and had a pseudonym. But Amsterdam is a bloated mess, but it's so much better than Accidental Love. So, and to be honest, yeah, he took his name off it, but he still directed most of that movie. So I would say that is his worst. The next director is George Lucas. Phantom Menace is the pick. I don't get it. I don't understand. His direction is not bad in that movie. I think THX 1138 is his worst film. Doesn't matter what version of the film you watch, whether it's the director's cut or the theatrical version, it's just a nonsensical, just hard film to sit through. And it's another one of those things where it's on the same level as Dark Star for me, where it's like, okay, this is a start of something, but this isn't what I would consider to be quality filmmaking or a good movie. Like I Phantom Menace has its issues, but it's not worse than THX 1138. And the next director is James Cameron, and the pick is Piranha 2. Can't disagree with that. That's definitely his worst movie. Even though he didn't direct all of it, and he really wasn't technically the director. Really, it was the producer of Video Giosantis who did most of the directing, because he was the one that was essentially telling James Cameron to shoot scenes a certain way. James Cameron was just a guy behind the camera for that movie. So really, it was Video Giosantis who was responsible for that film. But since James Cameron's name is on it, then yeah, that is his worst film. The next director is Tim Burton, and the pick was Planet of the Apes, the Planet of the Apes remake. And I get that, but for me, it's Dark Shadows. It seemed like something that was like right in his wheelhouse, and it just turned into an absolute just mess. Just a really silly, just boring, just awful bad movie. Like just in a lot of ways, like a really crappy version of Edward Scissorhands. And I'd rather watch the Planet of the Apes remake over Dark Shadows. Number 47 on the list. The director is Gus Van Sant, and the pick was the Psycho remake. I'm not going to change that. There's no reason to. That is definitely his worst film, and that is definitely a really bad movie. One of the worst remakes ever, because it's completely, absolutely pointless. It's essentially a shot-for-shot remake of the original Psycho, with just new actors, change the setting up a little bit, and maybe one or two different scenes, and that's it. Completely pointless. The next director is Steven Spielberg, and the Rolling Stone writer, he picked Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I don't get it. That is not one of his worst films. It's not even a bad film. I did a live stream with two of my friends defending that movie. I did a long review of it. Want to hear more of my thoughts on that film? Go ahead and look those two up. But to me, Spielberg's worst film that he was a part of is Twilight Zone the movie, because his worst ever direction is in Kick the Can. Like, that is easily his worst effort in anything he's ever done with a camera. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know how you'd be like, oh yeah, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, that's worse than his direction in Kick the Can. No, not even remotely close. So yeah, Twilight Zone the movie easily. And then the next director, the 49th director on the list is Rob Reiner, and the writer picked North. I can't debate that. I'm not going to argue that. That's the right pick for that director. And then number 50, the last director, is Francis Ford Coppola. And the pick the writer had is Jack. I honestly like Jack. It's flawed. It has its problems. I grew up with the film. I enjoy it. I think Robin Williams is perfect casting to play an overgrown child. It's got a good song by Bryan Adams called Star in the soundtrack. And Fran Drescher has a good supporting role. I like Jack. And to me, it's a much better movie in Francis Ford Coppola's filmography than Twixt. Both versions of that movie. So Twixt, to me, like, that's easily the worst film that he's done. Other than some of the earlier films that he did before he had his breakout film. Anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.